Hello, we're back for Chapter 3 of The Exiled Prince. Sam's curled up in my lap, he's ready to go. I've got a cup of tea, I'm ready to go. Chapter 3 is called The First Test. You guys had a test yet this year in school? Well, I think Daniel and his friends are going to have a test of a different kind. Let's start. The Babylonian soldiers hastened their captives across the deep, water-filled moat and through the massive brick walls. The striplings forgot to be frightened as they stared at the magnificent buildings they saw. They were hurried down the road, a broad avenue of victory, straight to the king's palace. To their surprise, they were not thrown into a dungeon. Instead, they were taken to a lovely group of rooms at the rear of the palace. They were being given basins of water to wash and to change their clothes, and then they were brought into a carpeted room and seated on cushions. A swarthy, black-haired man waited silently for them, his arms folded across his chest. The whispering of the captives stopped. "I am Ashpenaz, prince of the eunuchs of my lord King Nebuchadnezzar." The man spoke Hebrew. Why hadn't they guessed? Their eyes darted back and forth. He was watching their every movement. He had watched them through their long trip across the desert, and now they realized he had understood every word they had said to each other. Every word everyone had said. They had no secrets from him. "You're surprised I speak Hebrew?" Ashpenaz smiled faintly, his eyebrows arched. "We Babylonians love knowledge of all kinds. That is why my lord the king of Babylon instructs me to bring you to his land. I have chosen you for your royal blood, your fair faces, and your bright minds. We will teach you all the wisdom of the Babylonians, the secrets that we have learned through 1,000 years of study and learning and watching the movements of the stars. These you will learn. At the end of 3 years, you will be taken before the king for his approval. You will not be ordinary slaves, not if you stay obedient. But you must not show any of that rebellious spirit for which the kings of Judah are famous. I warn you that King Nebuchadnezzar is terrible in his wrath." A ghost of a smile crossed Ashpenaz's face. "Now before you dine, I will give you Babylonian names. I cannot curl my tongue easily around your strange Jewish names." He walked down the row of boys, assigning a new name to each one. For the first time since the boys left Jerusalem, they had laughed out loud. Hebrew names hard to pronounce. Why, those Babylonian names could twist the tongue in two. Hananiah's name was changed to Shadrach. Mishael's new name was Meshach, and Azariah became Abednego. Where have you heard those names before, huh? We'll get there. When Ashpenaz came to Daniel, he put an arm around his shoulder. Daniel trembled, but stood as tall as he could, and looked straight into the man's face. Ashpenaz's face softened. "You are a good lad. I've watched you these weeks. You control your mind as well as your body. You have been gentle with these companions and kind, and yet you're not afraid to fight, were you? Now you face a different kind of fight, but I see by your eyes that you are already girding for it. You will win this fight too, I think. Your name is Daniel, which means God is my judge. I will name you Belteshazzar, because an inner voice tells me that you will indeed Protect my lord the king." Ashpenaz clapped his hands. Servants swarmed into the room, carrying flagons of wine and platters heaped high with rich foods. "Young men, you may eat. Here is meat and drink sent from the king's table for your pleasure." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. What should he do? Babylonian food, meat. It wouldn't be cooked so that a Jew could eat it. Food on the trip across the desert had not been a problem. Dried fruits and raisins and hard bread and cheese and water. But this food, the Babylonians wouldn't know that God had special rules for the foods that the Jews could eat. Rules that would tell everybody that the Jews were different from other people. The animals had to be killed a certain way. The blood had to be drained out. And some animals Jews couldn't eat at all. But how would the Babylonians know? What should Daniel do? He had promised God he would do right no matter what happened. How could he eat this food and drink this wine when he knew it was wrong? "Daniel, aren't you hungry?" There was a smirk on the face of the Jewish lad who called across the room. Daniel shook his head. "Ah, come on, why aren't you eating?" The boy was determined to embarrass Daniel. "I can't break God's laws and eat this food." "Oh, don't be silly. Who'll ever know? Not your father or the priests." "God will know," Daniel said quietly. Hananiah was just about to shovel food in his mouth when he heard Daniel speak. "Psst! Azariah, Mishael, wait. Daniel says this food's not kosher." "Ugh," Azariah said glumly. My mouth was watering for a bite of that meat. But he put it down. "What are you going to do, Daniel?" "We'll see. Maybe Ashpenaz will give us some vegetables." The other boys in the room began to jeer. "Hear this! Daniel thinks he's Jeremiah Jr. We left Jerusalem so we could get away from that old prophet poking his nose into everybody's business. And we got stuck with Daniel." Daniel flushed. "I'm not criticizing you. I'm just saying I'm not going to eat this. I promised God that I wouldn't defile myself. That's all there is to it." "You and God. Who cares? He doesn't care about us." Yes, he does. And I'm going to stay true to him." Daniel put his plate down and stepped over to where Ashpenaz stood. "Excuse me, sir. Could I talk to you?" Ashpenaz nodded. "Sir, you know that we're Jews, and we're supposed to be different from other people." Daniel flushed under Ashpenaz's steady gaze. "God made certain laws about what we can eat. This food is forbidden to us." "Sir, I'm sure it tastes good. I don't mean that, but we aren't supposed to eat it." Out of the corner of his eye, Daniel saw Hananiah waving furiously at him and pointing at Azariah and Mishael. "Oh, my friends, too. They'd like permission not to eat it. So, do you have some beans or peas or spinach and just some water that we could have?" Ashpenaz looked surprised, but he smiled kindly. "Belteshazzar, I like you. I like your spunk. But you are skin and bones. If I took you to the king looking like that, he'd chop off my head. No, Belteshazzar, you're going to eat the king's food with thanks." But Daniel didn't give up. When the next meal was served, he went to Melzar, the servant of Ashpenaz. "Sir, I've got an idea." Melzar grinned and reached out and ruffled Daniel's head. "That head of yours is full of ideas. But this is a good one. Let's make a test for 10 days. Give us vegetables to eat and water just for 10 days, and we'll see who's healthier. It wouldn't hurt to try just for 10 days, would it?" "All right, 10 days. You sure keep trying, don't you, Daniel?" Melzar lightly cupped him on the shoulder. For 10 days, Daniel and his friends ate the plain, wholesome food that they'd asked for. The rest of the boys ate the rich seasoned meats and sweets and wines of the king. At the end of 10 days, it was easy to see who had won. Daniel and his friends were husky and clear-eyed, and their cheeks were rosy. The other boys were thin and listless and tired all the time. From that day on, Melzar gladly gave Daniel and his friends the food that they requested. God blessed the 4 boys in other ways, too. They learned the Chaldean language quickly. They understood their lessons. They remembered the dates and the charts. They learned the movements of the stars and the planets. When the royal summons came, long before the 3 years were up, Ashpenaz was not afraid to take them into the presence of the king. The 4 young Jews bowed nervously. They tried to sneak a look at the king while their heads were bowed. They were dazzled by the glittering clothes and the fierce eyes and the intense, graveling voice. The king asked them dozens of questions. Hard questions, trick questions, rapid fire, and they answered him eagerly and courteously in his own tongue. The king waved a jeweled hand. Enough, enough. Ashpenaz, you chose well. These young men know 10 times as much as any astrologer or magician anywhere in my kingdom. They will serve me well. He turned to the boys. From this day forward, Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you will stand in my presence. You will stand with the wise men of Babylon. But that promotion to be one of the wise men of Babylon, intended to be an honor, nearly turned out to be a death sentence for Daniel and his friends. That's the end of chapter 3. A death sentence. We'll have to see what happens next. You know, sometimes it pays to do the right thing. For Daniel and his friends, it definitely worked out better that they followed God's laws, even though nobody else would have known if they hadn't. Their parents would never have known. None of their teachers from Jerusalem would ever have known. There was nobody that could make them do the right thing. They did it because they wanted to please God. That is character. And character pays off in the end. So, we'll be back for chapter 4.